Good evening and welcome to Transcontinental Times on your show, Smart Entrepreneurship Decoded. I'm back in Jakarta from my sojourn in Singapore, and while I was walking through the near empty malls of Singapore, which I spoke about last time, something struck me. Retail has changed forever, but looking at the young people and the brands that they buy, I was surprised that there's such a difference in what they buy and what people of my age group buy. I have spoken to a lot of them because I speak at a lot of universities, colleges, run an edutech company myself. And increasingly, now this trend was there from earlier as well, but now it has kind of found a tipping point and it's become a movement. Increasingly, every brand has a narrative, every brand has a story to tell, and the story resonates with their target audience. It's either about what they stand for, or their values, or the way they contribute back to society, or some other way. Climate change being a big part of it, right? No longer is it feeding people in Africa or just looking after the girl child. Even in our personal lives, take entrepreneurship for example. You will hear time and again investors and other stakeholders talk about we bought into the narrative. We valued the future narrative. They're not valuing the numbers only. It's not that they ignore all the business points, but if you have a narrative, if you have a story to tell that connects and resonates with your target audience and connects your business to the end client, you always seem to get a better hearing, a longer rope, and sometimes a better valuation and a disproportionate valuation. Closer home, if you're in corporate life, you will notice there are people in your office who always stand out and you like to hear them speak, not just because of what they are speaking, not just because how they are speaking, but they seem to bring the issue to light or the key issues to light by speaking about it with a story or some example that resonates with you. So tonight I thought, why not bring an expert who can help us eh, demystify the storytelling side of it? Now, she has an interesting background herself. Sinjini Sengupta, who runs Lighthouse, is actually an actuary and practiced for 12 years. Now, for those of you who don't know, don't take it up if you don't know mathematics and you can't study too hard and write one of the toughest exams in the country. But she gave all that up. And today, she's one of the leading lights on this art of storytelling and various other factors. Let's just dive right in. Sinjini, welcome to the show. Very happy to have you here tonight.
Thank you so much, Nalin. And I really love your introduction there. Thank you for having me.
So tell us, what is this storytelling style and how does one build it? A lot of us are introverted like me. A lot of us don't have the language, etc. But I've seen people succeed despite all of this. What is it that makes it tick?
First, nothing to do with introversion. That is one myth about storytelling. I guess we tell stories 24 cross 7. We are broadcasting machines. We tell stories with even our silence. So that quiet person who is sitting and just watching everything go by is telling a story of her own. So that definitely is the basis of storytelling. I think storytelling is frankly another word for communication, where there is pathos, where there is heart, where there is head, where there is analysis, everything put together. Like you very wonderfully described, how it works really is that it tunes to the other person. People understand, people see the character. So when we talk business, so far we were talking business and numbers. But what we were not highlighting in the process is that every business is a human problem. Every problem is a human problem. If it is not, it shouldn't bother us. And stories bring that aspect forward. Who is the character? What is the context? What is happening? What happens otherwise? So what? Then what? How do you show them the dream by the end of it? Be it a product, be it a leadership keynote, I think stories really bring hearts to that communication.
So let's talk about this. You studied and became an actuary, and I, being a chartered accountant, have a fair idea of what that intakes. It's pretty dull and dreary, and people are trying to tell you stories to actually increase their valuation or whatever. How do you, a person like you, make that leap? What tipped it for you, and where did you realize that you have a calling on another side?
That actually is a very interesting story, Nalin, and it's actually longer the way it happened. So I'm an actuary of 12 years. I have a background in quantitative economics from Indian Statistical Institute, which you would know is one of the premier institutes in
Yes.
India. So with that kind of a background, my CV is very left brain heavy. I had a huge burnout about 5, 7 years back. And around that time, I was working as a group leader with a pretty large team of actuaries who I was leading. And I was quite, in a bad shape. And of course, when you have a burnout, I mean, you can go into describing it further, but a part of it is work stress or the amount of work you are doing or the timing or the kind of work life balance or the lack of it. But a large part of it is what are the stories you are telling yourself about it? Where are you going with your work? Does it have meaning? Does it have purpose? Do you feel like doing what you are doing, or doing just do, you know, just out of the regularity of the calendar? So a lot of these questions, which I did not know really were narratives I was telling inside my 2 years. Uh, I had a burnout. I was a step away from quadri paralysis. So essentially, the doctor told me you have to rest up at least a bit. And I thought I'll take a break of 6 months and I'll quickly come back to my old role. But life had a very different plan. I oftentimes say that, I didn't pick up the pen picked me up. I was at one point in time in a pretty, like you would know, I had major depressive disorder and a number of other chronic problems. I would even find it difficult to answer the doorbell, to be very honest, around that time. I wrote a short story, like I was just really kind of, toying with my emotions and trying to put words to them. My husband, he's my classmate from ISI, and he has always had a very strong right brain side. While he's, of course, he works as in the bank, he wanted to make it into a short film and he did that. And the next thing we know, things went off the roof. It was selected to be screened at Cannes in 2016 in the 69th Cannes Film Festival. We were invited to walk the red carpet. When we went there and then we came back, it also won a number of other international awards, etc., for screenplay direction. And at one of the screenings in Gurgaon, somebody walked up to me, gave me his card, and said that, this is a very strong story and it deserves to be laid out in a book. Would you write that? It is a typical traditional publishing with a royalty and everything. I signed the contract of my first book first before I even, put the first word on the manuscript. So it's been quite a miracle. I mean, there's no other word to describe this. The book came out, it was named among 5 best fictions in 2017 by GLF. In fact, around that time, I was also very heavily trying to understand what happened to me really. Because I had a ridiculous amount of privilege. If you see, I had a very strong CV, I had great experience, and all the everything went well for me. And if I couldn't sustain a corporate job, I felt very guilty, ashamed, and I thought, something is wrong with me. I went to Vipassana many times. As we speak, I've gone 6 times, so 10 days each time of noble silence. I was trying to find the reason why it happened to me, and am I the only one? And the moment I was talking about, how I felt, there were way too many people who were saying they felt the same way. And I'm like, why aren't you saying that? Why do you pretend it's a happy decision, change of priority? Why do you Photoshop your pictures on social media? So I was almost, taken aback that if this is a common story, there's a gender piece of it. There is also a mental health piece of it. Even men around, we call it midlife crisis and laugh away. But there is definitely something that is wrong about not having an emotional space and, an emotional belonging at workplaces. So I don't know when it happened, but slowly that kind of became my calling, that I wanted to bring hearts to work because I was burnt out due to the lack of it. So my first TEDx,
That,
second TEDx
yeah.
were both on women, workplace culture, upbringing, mental health, the overlap of these two or three problems. And that's how I became a storyteller.
Thanks for sharing that. I mean, I had my own burnout 10 years ago, and it led to a book on midlife crisis, and my life also took a different turn. But there are some powerful words you used there, and I want to dig a little bit deeper over there. You said something about purpose, and then you also said something about what stories do you tell yourself. So, in your experience, have you found that where you're in the first half of your life, 10, 15 years, you're pretty much telling yourself the story that you have been conditioned to tell? You
Oh,
need to pursue
yes.
these financial goals, etc., etc., etc. And by the time it dawns on you that the story of a life is possibly something different, uh, that's when people have that aha movement. So, is there a way that people can actually listen to themselves and tell themselves the right narrative before they speak to anybody else?
That's a very powerful and a very deep question, and you are so right. I was not telling myself any new story. I was telling the story my teachers and my parents told me, and I fell for it. Like all of us fall for it because we know no better. So there is a Sharma ji ka beta story, which is like the straight highway to success. I guess, I read a line somewhere. This is definitely not my own invention, but I love it that everyone has two lives. The second one starts when you realize you have one life. So
Well said.
I feel that a part of it is definitely that uh, we are pushed to the corner. Some of us are brave who take the plunge, who have a 6 month saving, and there is a formula to taking a plunge. But there are some of us who are very timid heart and who are not really very like brave, but catastrophe leads them to another life. So I don't know what happens, who it happens to, and when, and who deserves. But I definitely feel that we should not wait for a one big push. The other interesting thing, Nalin, and I know you would perhaps understand this, if I knew everything that I know now, I perhaps wouldn't burn out. I think it was the wisdom. It was not really running Lighthouse versus being an actuary. It was about being wise, about knowing that our mind and body are connected, about knowing it is important to stop and smell the rose. So even though purpose sounds like a very nice word, I think it's a little yesterday to talk about purpose. It is more about the experience of life in the present tense. So
So,
definitely I
Sinjini,
am serving a purpose, but I'm not hustling, which I was doing before.
so at least in my time, the narrative we were sold was you study here, science, arts, engineering, medical, etc. We were the outcasts who did accountancy. Then you have this career and you have a good retired life. Now, a similar narrative is being played out today with the youth, which is you start your own company and then you get this fantastic valuation and you become rich by the time you're 30. And all of us know it's a 90% failure scheme. Now, is the youth falling for a different narrative now?
You said it. In fact, just a couple of days back on LinkedIn, I don't know if you got a chance to read it. I had just said something that our act of chasing purpose or whatever, the second way in life was in part a rebel, against our parents. Now, if we are talking so much about purpose and go chase your rainbow, uh, that extra force is taken away because there is no force of protest or rebel. So what is going to fuel their lives? Also, the other dangerous thing I would say is that like it or not, we might, both of us incidentally had a similar burnout and second innings. We would also realize by this time, given our experience and age, that nothing goes to waste. Even if we were not enjoying that job, there are things we picked up, dealing with people, leadership skills, typical, and even being in the corporate culture to understand how to talk, how to listen. Recently, and especially because I was part of two very large incubation processes, like with IIM Bangalore for 13 months, and then with Goldman Sachs and Indian School of Business, like, so both of these things exposed me to a number of entrepreneurs of various age groups. And what was very interesting is that people are becoming entrepreneurs at a very young age, which is great, and there are great success stories to prove there's nothing right or wrong by formula. However, it's, you may, like, we learned it through decades in the workplace. Somebody may be born with it, but it is important to have the capability to understand emotions. To manage is a huge psychological job. To grow a team, to understand, client centricity, customer centricity, to understand, see things from their point of view, these are huge psychological exercises. And at times when we are just hustling and we are like celebrating the hustle, it comes with age, but there is another way. People are born perhaps, or whatever it is. But the danger of, starting at 21 and, becoming like the kind of, the storyline that you spoke about, 30, at times I see them missing out on some of the nuances that are not visible. Like, it's a very pumped up, fist pump in the air model. Like, guys, go get it done, so valuation. But the culture of the corporate is not percolated. Nobody knows, what do the companies stand for? What is the value system? What is the morality? What is the change? What is the dent in the universe? That people are basically hired for sales, and they're like pumping the sales
True.
process. There is a problem that's definitely, we can see the
So,
smokes.
talk to me about how should young entrepreneurs approach. Let's forget the values, etc., in the company. That's a topic on its own, and will take too long. But when they, even for sales, how do they build a narrative around their brand, around themselves? Because the rest of it they will fix someday, hopefully, or they'll wake up. But at least the investor facing, client facing, because we see so many brands today where the Gen Z gets attracted to them for things my generation at least would have thought is frivolous, right? But people today's Gen Z takes it very seriously, and rightfully so. So how do they build these narratives? I mean, is there a
Right.
structure to it? Because it doesn't. I'm sure there's a methodical way of building it as well.
See, definitely there is a method behind the madness. I mean, storytelling is, or stories for that matter, is art. You cannot define it. You cannot say, this is the way to it. But there is a craft behind any art form. So, yes, there is a craft form. Yes, there is a method. Specifically, the two categories of story that you spoke about right now is one, the founder story, two, the product story. Not so much about the brand story or the value story, as you said, that will come later, but the product. So both these stories have different uses, but they complement each other. One is the ethos. Why are you the right person to do this? What brought you here? Where are you going from here? And why do you know more than us? And have you faced this? Have you faced this problem? Do you know the problem closely, or do you know the solution closely? I may be from IT and I have a niche, like knowledge of the solution, or I may be a mother who suffered something and I know this, I solved it for myself and I'm solving it for the. So founder stories are important because, of course, people buy you. People don't buy the product first, they buy you. There are way too many companies mushrooming across the world. We cannot contest with the Amazons and the Flipkarts of the world. We can only stand up, be visible, be trustable, and people would trust us, they would like us, they would want to buy from us. If we pivot and do something else, they would still go with us. So founder story is immensely powerful, and I think that's the biggest piece that has to be sorted first. Even if you don't want to tell it as a personal branding story, you should know it yourself. What brought you here? Where are you going from here? And why you, and why this? Again, the problem story and the fitment, then you have to totally change roles. Like, the person who suffers this, who is that person? Of course, there's an entire method behind that customer profiling, understanding their lives, etc. But to humanize that story as deeply, like if you have 1000 chaotic voice inside your head, like each one of us does, your customer also does have that. Don't make them into 2D cardboard cutouts. Like, okay, fine, tier 2, this, that. They are as complex as you are. So you have to understand them as intimately as you would want to spend on you.
So You and your company Lighthouse work with a lot of founders, entrepreneurs, business owners, etc. Talk to me about one client, without naming them, obviously, that has given
Mhm.
you the most satisfaction, or something that has really changed for them, a change that you could bring about.
Right. Uh, it's difficult to choose one story, but I work with a number of people, some of who are founders, some of who are social change makers, and a lot of them are in the corporate, like middle-aged corporate who come by themselves or, in a B2B format, come through the company. A few of the very interesting stories I have had, I think, I'm trying to choose in my mind. Maybe I should say this, that to begin with, we all make mistakes in figuring out who my target group is. So by default, I thought that it must be somebody like me 5 years or 10 years back. If I had a problem, I solved it, and now I'm offering it to the world. It must be me 10 years back. And there was a natural, looking for women. And in today's age of digital, there are women WhatsApp groups, and somehow you belong to coteries of, you are stereotyped into those groups. There are very few intergender groups, which is a pity. We should talk about it. So I was doing that, but a number of, men uh, pinged me on LinkedIn and said, when is the next cohort, etc., etc. And then when I eventually started, I really started the next cohort on, on coaxing from them. And they made it possible even if they overlapped office hours and all. And the beautiful stories that came through, Nalin, I remember one of the stories definitely was that there's this, middle aged, like a couple of years older to me, middle senior kind of leader in the corporate. So he had COVID and he was, of course, isolated in his room. And one night he woke up. So he is narrating the story that, one night I woke up realizing there's air all around me, but I cannot breathe. And, do I call somebody? Do I bother them? What do I do? And that insecurity and that entire narrative, held us by the breath. And then, there was a squeak at the door, and the dog somehow sensed, that he was uncomfortable. The dog came and just hugged him, whereas perhaps, the closer, of course, as humans we don't have that perceptive or, that kind of sensory thing. That was heartwarming, and that told me, a big story that I was telling myself wrong. Who is my target group? And forget target group, that sounds very commercial. It's really like who can benefit. I think, that was a huge
So,
eye-opening
for a,
exercise.
for a story to resonate, and I'm
Yeah.
talking of corporate stories, what are
Yeah.
the key elements? One I heard right now from you, it should be heartwarming, or it should touch you in some way, right? What else are the key components?
Components, of course, the components of typical creative writing is there has to be a character that resonates, there has to be a context, there has to be a problem that climaxes and intensifies. You have to intrigue and play with their psyche a bit before you give the solution. So these are typically, if I talk about components as like as a very specific word. But what makes a very, story very solid, I feel, is of course the experiential side of it. The biggest piece would be that it's not like, let me tell you a story, there was once upon a time. It's not like that. Stories can be like, really,
So,
6 words
in your
Hemingway story.
experience, the successful leaders who have a
Yeah.
good storytelling style, uh, do they practice it, or or have they trained themselves to become natural? I mean, how much of it has to be actually worked upon?
It is totally, see, people are born with certain kind of charisma. And here is perhaps one of the biggest battles that I have defined for myself, that we have only looked at certain kind of speakers, and we have said that these people are telling stories, great public speakers, we want to be like them. And that is a stereotype, because we know these are males, these are people who go up the stage, they wave and spread their arms like, like a bird, they have fist pump in the air, there's a certain boom in their voice. But think of it, the stories we tell every day, we sit down cross-legged with a cup of tea and we talk. And my agenda is that if you can do it in your drawing room, what changes when you walk up the you know, podium? What changes when you take the mic? What changes when there are not two but 2,000 people in front of you? The only thing that changes is the way you see it, perceive it, is like, we look at it through a lens of fear. So my I bring in a lot of NLP and a lot of subconscious tools and techniques through the process, where I want to make you feel that take fear out of the equation. You move out of your own way. The person who was sitting cross-legged sipping tea on and not worrying where my hands are is the same person that is now standing on the stage. Don't think you were different. Tell the same story the same way. We need conversations. It's not like we need public speakers to come and wow us. We need conversations. We need the person to feel like they are understood, they have a scope to enter and exit the conversation. So that's perhaps the biggest piece. So I don't do performance storytelling. I help you to imbibe it as a muscle. Like it becomes your second
That's
nature to
true.
be able to
That's
speak
true.
better.
You well said. Very often it's not the most slick storyteller, but somebody who comes across as authentic, and
Yes.
the audience invariably can make out authentic to non-authentic, except from very slick politicians who take us for a ride time and again, time and again. But that's a different thing altogether. But on a parting note, because we're completely out of time, what would be one or two things you would advise to a young graduate of on the whole communication and personal branding side of it in this age of social media? What are one or two things that they should take care of?
Since you mentioned young professionals, it gives me an opportunity to say this. There is a study that says that 85% of the jobs that will be there in 2030 have not yet been invented as yet. Wrap that around your head. 85% of the jobs of 2030 are not even invented as yet. So instead of the way we looked at career as our generation, or even
Mhm.
now we are kind of trying to influence the younger people that this is the road to success. I think whatever you are naturally good at, and there is a way of understanding this, what do you enjoy doing, there is a way of commercializing it and making it, tie a bow ribbon on it and putting it out, and people have got their basic needs. If you're going to sell something, who knew Facebook can be, a behavior changing, like social media can be a business proposition. So the sky is not even the limit. Now what is important is for us to understand what is my north star, what is my inner compass, what do I love to do, and how can I make it a viable product. So that's very important, to change the lens completely, from outside in into inside out.
True.
Just ask yourself
Sinjini,
what you enjoy doing.
absolutely. Sinjini, it has been fascinating speaking with you. And it is a topic that is not, mainstream, but it is so essential in every workplace. People keep speaking of soft skills, life skills, etc., etc. But in that, they tend to, I think, dumb down storytelling into communication and listening and things like that. Whereas storytelling is a lot more complex. There's a degree of yourself, a part of you. There is emotion, there's drama. It's almost like a Bollywood movie, but it has to be your own and it has to be authentic. Thank you very much, Sinjini, for joining us tonight. I wish you the best and we'll stay in touch with you in the future. Thank you and good night.
Thank you so much for having me, Nalin.